Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. Today's episode comes to you courtesy of Joseph, who's been supporting this channel as a general tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Joseph, so Joseph, thank you so much. And for the personalized deck tech, Joseph chose a deck built around Vorosh the Hunter, focusing on sacrifice. Vorosh the Hunter is a 6/6 dragon with flying that costs 3 black, green, blue. It has, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 2 and a green. If you do, put 6++1 counters on Vorosh. So Vorosh is an incredibly deadly dragon that, like many dragons, it is evasive having flying, and when it gets through on a player, well, it first off doubles up its power and toughness on the first hit if you pay that 2 and a green. So it goes from being a 6/6 to a 12/12, and then on the next time an 18/18. Yeah, it does not take long at all for this to become a 2-shot and then a 1-shot kill. So your opponents better have their defenses ready to survive this heavy-hitting commander, but with this kind of a deck focusing on our opponents sacrificing things, they're not going to have that defense. So we will quickly and efficiently wipe out their armies and wipe them out with Vorosh the Hunter. Now, really quick before we jump into the cards for this deck, every single card in the deck, including the commander, is less than $1, so it's an incredibly budget-friendly deck. And now with all that said, let's jump into it. First up, I just want to bring up a fantastic example of what we're looking for with this kind of a deck with a card like Plaguecrafter. It's a 3/2 human shaman for 2 and a black, and it has, when it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, each player who can't discards a card. So this is going to make all of our opponents have to sacrifice something, and if they don't, well, they're going to be discarding a card, so it hurts them no matter what. And actually, if they don't have any creatures or planeswalkers or a hand, well, they've got other problems to worry about. Now, of course, we have to sacrifice something as well, but we can just sacrifice Plaguecrafter, or, we've got plenty of other things sacrificed that we'll get to here in a bit. Regardless, of course, we've got a ton of fantastic sacrifice effects in this deck, so let's continue with things like Demon's Disciple, Flashback Marauder, and Slum Reaper. Demon's Disciple is somewhat similar to Plaguecrafter. It has, when it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. So it doesn't have that discard requirement, but still most of the time we're going to be hitting one thing from each person. And then Flashback Marauder and Slum Reaper each do the exact same thing. When they enter the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. The main thing with all these is that, yes, we might be losing a creature as well, but our opponents are going to be hurting more. Next up, 2 ways to just our opponents are with cards with Mire in Misery and Liliana's Triumph. Mire in Misery is going to make each opponent sacrifice a creature or enchantment, and Liliana's Triumph is going to make each opponent sacrifice a creature. And we can do that at instant speed, so keep that in mind. Next up, though, there's Deadly Brew, which says each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. If you sacrificed a permanent this way, you may return another permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So this one also affects us, but also gives us a benefit when we do sacrifice a creature. And again, like I mentioned before, we've got plenty of creature fodder, but we'll still get to that here in a bit. Moving forward, though, next up we've got Oath of Liliana, which has, when it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature, and yet another enchantment that can help us out is the Eldest Reborn. It's a saga, and its first lore counter says each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Its second says each opponent discards a card, and its third says put target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So this hits opponents pretty hard, and on top of that, it's going to get us something out of a graveyard. Whether that's one of our things or our opponent's things, it's a big benefit. And speaking of a big benefit, there's Virtus's Maneuver, which says for each player, choose friend or foe. Each friend returns a creature card from their graveyard to their hand. Each foe sacrifices a creature they control. So this can force our opponents to sacrifice some creatures, and on on top of that, we can get one of our creatures back, and that just might be something like Plaguecrafter, which makes opponents sacrifice even more creatures. Don't you see how much fun this is? And speaking of fun, we've got ways to make tokens while making our opponents sacrifice creatures with things like Siphon Flesh and Zot's Will. Siphon Flesh says each other player sacrifices a creature, you create a 2/2 black zombie token for each creature sacrificed this way. And then Zot's Will says choose one. If you control a commander as you cast this spell, you may choose both. Each opponent sacrifices a creature they control with the greatest power, exile all cards from all opponents' graveyards, then create X01 black throw creature tokens for X the greatest power among creatures exiled this way. Basically, get rid of your opponent's biggest things and then make a massive number of throw tokens that you're going to sacrifice to other spells. Like, Barter in Blood, Turgid Shadow, and Necrotic Hex. Both Barter in Blood and Turgid Shadow are going to make everyone sacrifice 2 creatures. And then Necrotic Hex is an absolutely massive edict effect, making each player sacrifice 6 creatures, but on top of that we get a big benefit, getting 6 zombies. And finally, we've got 2 creatures that can help us out in a big way with Butcher of Malakir and Overseer of the Damned. Butcher of Malakir says whenever it or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. This is an incredibly impactful effect that can really keep our opponent's boards clean. And then Overseer of the Damned says when it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target creature. Whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, create a tap 2/2 black zombie creature token. So now when our opponent's non-token creatures are dying, we're going to get a massive benefit out of that. And again, making more and more creature fodder is never a bad thing for this deck. Speaking of which, we can make even more creature fodder with things like Ogre Slumlord and Ghoulish Procession. Ogre Slumlord says whenever another non-token creature dies, you may create a 1/1 black rat creature token, and rats you control have Death Touch. This can create us an absolutely massive amount of creature fodder in no time. I mean, again, let's just even go back to our Plaguecrafter example. We cast that, its ETB happens, and everyone's got to sacrifice a creature. Well, creature or planeswalker. Let's say everyone sacrifices a creature. We sacrifice the Plaguecrafter, and all of our opponents sacrifice a non-token creature, and now we get 4 rats from that 1/3 mana spell. And not only are those rats fantastic creature fodder, but they also have Death Touch, so they're great blockers and great attackers too. And then Ghoulish Procession helps us out in a smaller but still very effective way. It says whenever 1 or more non-token creatures die, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. This ability triggers only once each turn. So unfortunately this can only happen once a turn, but it can give us a good amount of creature tokens throughout the game. Speaking of which, we are also going to be running token creators like Talryn Sky Summoner, Murmuring Mystic, and Arasta the Endless Web. Talryn's going to make us a 2/2 flyer whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, and Murmuring Mystic does the exact same thing, but those are 1/1 flyers. And then Arasta the Endless Web is going to make us a 1/2 spider token with reach whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell. So if these stick around for a good amount of time, we can get a lot of value out of these. Moving on, we're also going to be running Zendikar's Royal and Rampaging Baloths. Zendikar's Royal says whenever a land enters the battlefield on your control, create a 2/2 green elemental creature token. And Rampaging Baloths does the exact same thing, but in a bigger way. It's going to make us a 4/4 beast. Again, obviously having access to green, we've got plenty of ways to get a lot of lands into play. And finally, we're also going to be running Dreadhorde Invasion, From Beyond, and Paradox Zone. Dreadhorde Invasion says at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and amass 1. And again, that means we make a zombie army, or we get a +1 counter on a zombie army we control. This is a very efficient creature fodder engine if we keep utilizing these tokens to sacrifice so we can get more and more zombie armies throughout the game. And then From Beyond says at the beginning of your upkeep, put a 1/1 color cell Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield it has, sacrifice this creature, add 1 to your mana pool. So we can very effectively utilize those tokens for creature fodder or for some temporary ramp. And finally, we've got a token creator that can actually give us some really heavy hitters with Paradox Zone. It's going to enter the battlefield with a growth counter on it, and at the beginning of our end step, we double the number of growth counters on Paradox Zone. Then we get a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token, and we get X counters on it, where X is the number of growth counters on Paradox Zone. So essentially, we're going to get a 2/2, then a 4/4, then an 8/8, and you see where this is going. Our commander is definitely not the only one that can hit hard in this deck. But what are some ways to actually help our commander and some of our other creatures hit even harder? Well, let's start things off by talking about the Golden Pig of this deck, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is actually a very simple one with Fire Shrieker. Fire Shrieker is an equipment that costs 3, and it says equip creature has double strike, and it costs 2 to equip. Giving Vorosh double strike is an incredibly powerful thing. First off, let's just say that Vorosh is still that 6/6 flyer that we know and love. With double strike, we hit our opponent the very first time for 6 damage, and then Vorosh triggers. So we can pay 2 and a green, and if we do, we get 6 counters on Vorosh before it hits for the second part of double strike. So then it's going to be hitting for 12 damage, and then we can pay that 2 and a green one more time if we want to. So simply by giving our commander double strike and paying 2 and a green that first time, we just hit an opponent for 18 damage. On top of that, again, we grew our commander to be an 18-18 by the end of this if we paid 2 and a green twice. Now, you don't really have to do that because just even paying that 2 and a green the first time again makes Vorosh into a 12-12, and having double strike makes that into a 24 damage commander damage kill right there just on its own. So giving Vorosh double strike is an incredibly powerful thing, and that's what makes this incredibly simple equipment the golden pig of this deck. Regardless, some other things that can really help us out are cards like Grappling Hook, Necropolis Regent, and Corpsejack Menace. Grappling Hook is also going to give Vorosh double strike, though it does cost a little bit more to equip and it costs more to get out, but it's still very effective, and on top of that it says whenever equipped creature attacks, you may have target creature block at its turn Fable. And then Necropolis Regent says, whenever a creature you control deals combat to a player, put that many ++1 counters on it. So you could probably guess that this can get really out of control with our commander. Speaking of which, there's Corpsejack Menace, which says if one or more ++1 counters be put on a creature you control, twice that many are put on instead. So now when we pay that 2 and a green, instead of getting 6 counters on our commander, we're getting 12. So essentially with any of these, it takes basically no time to turn our commander into a one-shot kill. But now that we've talked about our plans, what are some ways that we can throw a wrench into our opponent's plans? First up, let's talk about Plaxcaster Frogling and Sporeback Troll. Plaxcaster Frogling has pay 2, target creature with a ++1 counter on it gains Shroud this turn. And of course, this creature has Graph, so it comes into play with 3 counters on it, and we can distribute those regardless. This is a repeatable way that can protect itself and our commander. Speaking of which, there's Sporeback Troll, which has Graph 2, and by paying 1 and a green, we regenerate target creature with a counter on it. And repeatable protection like these can be a very powerful thing. We can also protect our commander and our other things as well, though, with counter spells like Negate, Arcane Denial, and Neutralize. Negate's going to counter target non-creature spell, Arcane Denial is going to counter any spell, and its controller can draw up to 2 cards if we gain next turn's upkeep, then we draw a card as well, and Neutralize is going to counter target spell, and it's got cycling for 2. And of course, outside of all of our Edict effects, we're also going to be running other types of removal with things like Alchemist Retrieval, Depart the Realm, Return Nature, Raven Form, Unravel the Aether, and Aether Gale. And now that we're going through lists of cards, let's go through the card advantage spells in this deck with things like Read the Bones, Fateful Truth, Chemist's Insight, Factor Fiction, Behold the Motherverse, Reign of Revelation, Precon Perception, Epiphany of the Drowned Yard, Careful Consideration, and Momentous Fall. And keep in mind, especially with Momentous Fall, it can help us draw an incredible amount of cards if we're willing to sacrifice something big like, our commander. And to round things out, let's talk about some fantastic ramp spells in this deck with cards like Diligent Farmhand, Fond of Fertility, Rampant Growth, Edge of Autumn, Explore, Growth Spiral, Search for Tomorrow, Harrow, Cultivate, and Grow from the Ashes. Oh, that was a lot of cards. Anyways, now that we've gone through every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the price. And like I mentioned at the start of this episode, this is an incredibly budget-friendly deck with every single card in it, including the commander, being less than $1. So the estimated cost for this deck comes to just $29.92. And actually, this cost even includes the basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you've got those lands already, well, there's some extra savings there. And speaking of extra savings, you might be able to save even more by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damaged cards, which of course need a home too. Though do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you, so make sure you comment below and let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.